Now, this is the next section. You might have to read it off your phone. All right, this is Israelites in slavery. This is the last section. Okay?
This is Negro who can write Hebrew.
Huh?
He is deaf and dumb.
Remember this
and
is the last one? Go ahead. So this is a Negro that can write Hebrew. Okay, go ahead.
He is deaf and dumb and comes from an African town. Hartford, Connecticut, September 19th. A young African Negro has been in this city for the last few days who claims to be a Hebrew. He is deaf and dumb and as black as the ace of spades. He carries a pad of paper with him and answers all questions by writing them in Hebrew and Lashon Kodesh.
Lashon Kodesh. Yeah, it's like that, you know.
What excites the most wonder is that he writes Lashon Kodesh very rapidly. It is a language of the books of Moses and is made a special study of, spoken and written with ease only by the rabbis and highly educated Hebrews. The Negro was sent to one of the rabbis of Hartford, who was perfectly satisfied that he is a Hebrew. He says that he came from a large town in Africa where there is a tribe of about 20,000 black Hebrews who speak Lashon Kodesh and are quite prosperous.
Lashon Kodesh.
He also says that his father is a rabbi in that town, and that is why his father took the trouble to teach him to write these languages, which needed an extra amount of labor on account of his being deaf and dumb.
That's all. We got the point here, right? All right, next slide. Now, obviously, you see the bottom images of the transatlantic slave trade in the boats. You can read the top.
You have South Carolina. This is the source. South Carolina's Turkish People, A History and Ethnology by Terry Ann Ognebens, Glenn Browder on page 77. African slaves from regions of Islamic influence in the Old World, including some who were literate in their Arabic language and knowledgeable of the Quran and Bible.
Knowledgeable of what?
Of the Quran and Bible.
So they were already knowledgeable of the Quran and the Bible. Good.
Were imported and distributed throughout the southeastern colonies and states.
Next slide.
The source is Muslim Slaves by James W. Hagee, page 26. In 1786, two men appeared in Charleston, dressed in the Moorish habit, and aroused a great deal of suspicion by their strange ways. Therefore, an officer of the law began to try to question them. The Moors, he found, did not know English and resented the suspicious lawmen. According to an officer, the men became impertinent and vulgar. As a result, the lawman gave one of his fellows a little manual correction by way of reforming his manners. By this time, mob had gathered and the authorities feared a riot might break out. Finally, they determined that the two were of the Jewish nation. They then took the men to the home of a woman on East Bay Street who understood their language. She found out that the two had sailed from Algeria to Virginia, where they had been arrested on suspicion of their being Algerians, and they had traveled overland to South Carolina.
Two black men, right here, that they were of what? Finally, they determined two were of the Jewish nation. Yeah, next slide.
One source is The Soul of Judaism. Jews of African Descent in America by Bruce D. Haynes on page 124 all the way to 125. A number of factors contributed to the Negro's identification within ancient Israel. The majority of Africans in North America were brought from West African societies, which regularly practiced ritual circumcision, the ritual slaughter of animals, and the separation of women during menstruation. The next source is Creole New Orleans, Race and Americanization.
This book right here, you should buy it. Yeah.
By Arnold R. Hirsch and Joseph Logsdon. Between June 1719 and January 1731, 16 slave trading ships arrived in Louisiana from the Senegal region. 6 ships came from Judah, Wida, a slave trading post, between February 1726 and January 1731. 12 slave ships from Senegal landed 3,259 slaves at Belize at the mouth of the Mississippi River. During the same period, one ship from Judah landed 464 slaves at the same port. The African slaves brought to the Chesapeake during the 18th century came mainly from Debright, Biafra, and were heavily Igbo.
And where were they going? New Orleans. So why is there such a what they call it, the Creole people with heavy witchcraft and voodoo? That also lines up with Haiti. Next slide. Now you see this, I just had it. That's the yoke of iron with bells used on slaves, man. Okay? Yeah, read that.
This is the sources from Black Jews, their religious challenge or politics versus religion, published by Cambridge University Press.
Cambridge University Press, yeah.
The following evidence was published in 1985. It confirms that the belief that Black people are Israelites is not new.
It's not new. Go ahead.
It has been around at least the last 119 years, and not just since the 1960s.
Not since One West started. Not since 1969. Go ahead.
And not just since the 1960s, as some people falsely teach.
Next slide.
The source is Nature Knows No Color Line by J.A. Rogers. Many of the Jews who were banished by Portugal by John II settled in the West Indies. John Bigelow, who visited Jamaica in 1850, saw the descendants of Jews and says they were Negroes.
Saw the descendants of the Jews in Jamaica and said they were Negro. Where was the main headquarters of pirates?
Kingston.
Next source.
The next source is The History of Jamaica by Edward Long, page 459 and 1774. You Jews, said he, and our nation, meaning the Coromantans.
The Coromantans, who was brought to the Caribbean islands and the West Indies. What did he say?
Ought to consider ourselves as the same.
Next source.
Source is The Black Jews, the Religious Challenge or Politics versus Religion, page 235. The study of customs and rites and the analysis of the semantics of these African tribes have led many of the observers to propose some hypotheses and to even draw some conclusions. Dr. Alan H. Godby reached the following conclusion. These factors have a very specific significance if we consider the presence of Judaism among the American Negroes. Hundreds of thousands of slaves were transported to America from West Africa during the trade which started some 400 years ago. What traces of Judaism is still remain among the Negroes of West Africa at that period? To the extent that they were persecuted, they were more likely than other Negroes to be seized during wars and sold as slaves. It is virtually certain that many part Jewish Negroes were among those sent as slaves to America.
Say that again.
It is visually certain.
It is virtually certain.
Virtually, that many part Jewish Negroes. Go ahead. Were among those sent as slaves to America.
Come on, man. Go ahead, Al. We almost done. Don't worry. Now, obviously, you know I gotta remind you. Look at all the people picking cotton, slaves. Okay.
Genealogy of Gwendolyn Ruth Hicks, book 1. The Gwen Schroeder Higdon, page 12. They soon found that the white Southern slave owners were crueler than the British loyalists. Many white slave owners considered the dark-skinned Iberians dark enough to be sold as slaves.
The dark-skinned Iberians dark enough to be sold as slaves. Go ahead. Next slide.
The source is Atlantic Africa and the Spanish Caribbean between 1570 and 1640 by David Wheat on page 151. In Cartagena, the flow of Portuguese migrants apparently never abated during the early 17th century. A second slave trade surge lasting from the late 1610s through the first half of the 1620s brought even larger numbers of Portuguese and Luso-Africans to the city.
And hold on, what? And Luso-Africans to the city. Right. Go ahead.
The next source is the same source, but on page 161 all the way to 162. In settlements throughout the Spanish Caribbean, individuals described as Portuguese blacks or Afro-Portuguese Creoles worked alongside diasporic Africans as fellow slaves and free people of color.
Next slide.
The source is from Oluda
Equiano.
Interesting narrative of Oluda Equiano, page 19 through 21.
Now this man right here is another primary source that wrote his own biography. How he was in slavery, where he was captured from, where he went to, and who his people were. Go ahead.
Such is the imperfect sketch my memory has furnished me with of the manners and customs of the people among whom I first drew my breath. And here I cannot forbear suggesting what has long struck me forcibly, namely, the strong analogy which is even by this sketch, imperfect as it is, appears to prevail in the manners and customs of my countrymen and those of the Jews before they have reached the land of promise. For we had our circumcision, a rule I believe peculiar to that people. We had also our sacrifices and burnt offerings, our washings and purifications, on the same occasions as they had. As to the difference in color between the Igboan, which is the Igbo Africans, and the modern Jews.
Next slide. Yeah.
The Negroes and the Jews by Lenora E. Burson on page 212. The land of Israel is located on the Western Asian borders of North Africa. All of the native inhabitants of the region were non-white.
We're not white. Yeah.
When Spain expelled its Jews in 1499, many of them went to Africa. It seems probable that some of them were brought later to America as slaves.
As slaves. Yeah.
The Negro spirituals never sing of African rivers.
Go ahead.
It's always the Jordan or the Red Sea. They don't sing about African chiefs.
They don't sing about no Hamitic shit. Yeah.
It's David or Moses or some other Jewish characters from the Bible.
Okay, go ahead. Next source.
Black Jews, the religious challenge of or politics versus religion. The studies of the customs and the analysts of the Semitics of these African tribes have led many of their observers to propose some hypotheses and even to draw some conclusions. I think I read this one already. Yeah, I say it does. I read this one already.
Okay, go ahead.
So I'm going to read the bottom half of it.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start from how many of them? How many of them would have been able to have been conserved some Jewish customs is another question. This conclusion put forward by Godby, which argues for the existence of a more or less recurrent Judaism in West Africa in the same places as those from which the Negroes were taken, is shared by others such as Maurice de la Fosse. But most significantly, it has been adopted by a class of educated Black Americans as a key argument to demonstrate that the Jewish religion is a traditional religion of Africans brought in slavery to the American continent. Nothing either confirms or repudiates this theory. In fact, we need to be very cautious in this instance. It is difficult to accept without some debate the thesis that these Black slaves in frequently insupportable material conditions in which they were forced to live were able to conserve, maintain and transmit a religion such as the Jewish religion. It is a commonplace that this religion in particular is subject to strict and well-defined rules of behavior and ritual.
Come on, man. We got one more slide, all right? One last one. Now, on the right is a Jewish revolt, an Israelite revolt, a slave revolt in Virginia. You understand that? A horrid massacre, tragical scene of them killing a bunch of damn crackers. All right? Read that source.
This is from the Black Jews of Africa, page 81 by Edith Bruder. The slaves believed themselves to be the oppressed Hebrews of the Bible and projected their own lives into the narratives not narratives, narrative of Israel's formative history.
Okay.
Gabriel Pasa,
Gabriel Prosser,
Denmark Vesey,
Denmark Vesey,
and Nat Turner
all
took inspiration in the Bible.
All took inspiration of the Bible. They didn't look at a damn Ankh. They didn't pick up a Quran. They read the Bible and revolted, man. That's the last slide I buy out. This is what they did. So do not ever let anybody tell you you ain't an Israelite. I went through plenty of sources and I got more. You understand? You already know I pray they understand. There's a lot of sources out there, and I could keep going. I gotta hold back some stuff because I'm doing the tribe breakdowns. So I gotta hold stuff back. All right? Read that, please, Bob.
Baruch chapter 2 and verse 30. For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people.
Mm-hmm.
But in the land of their captivity.
But in the what?
But in the land of their captivity.
But in the what?
But in the land of their captivity.
But in the land of their captivities, yeah?
They shall remember themselves.
We're gonna remember ourselves, man. They couldn't stop me on Clubhouse when I was getting randomly muted and getting kicked out the room for some odd reason. They couldn't stop us when they stopped the goddamn live stream and had it paused for a while. You understand? Because in the land of our captivities, we shall bethink ourselves. You understand that? Take us out,
It's a Psalm, chapter 119, Psalmic. I hate vain thoughts, but thy law do I love. Thou art my hiding place and my shield. I hope in thy word. Depart from me, ye evildoers, for I will keep the commandments of my God. Uphold me according unto thy word, that I may live, and let me not be ashamed of my hope. Hold thou me up, and I shall be safe, and I will have respect unto thy statutes continually. Thou hast trodden down all them that err from thy statutes, for their deceit is falsehood. Thou puttest away all the wicked of the earth, like dross. Therefore I love thy testimonies. My flesh trembleth for fear of thee, and I am afraid of thy judgments. In the name of Yahweh, Hashem Yahweh Shai, the water from Yad, Aman.
Aman.
Amajim Shabbat. Amajim. Baruch. Repeat after me. This is the real moral credence. We are to walk in the principles of the Holy Scriptures.
We are to walk in the principles of the Holy Scriptures.
And the fruit of the spirits.
And the fruit of the spirits.
To exercise and apply stern decorum.
To exercise and apply stern decorum.
And rectitude.
And rectitude.
That our faith may be found in the way of life.
That our faith may be found in our way of life.
We regard all men in our ranks.
We regard all men in our ranks.
We regard all men in the ranks of Christ.
We regard all men in the ranks of Christ.
We pray for mercy.
We pray for mercy.
We prepare for war.
We prepare for war.
This is the duty of all soldiers.
This is the duty of all soldiers.
Kom Yashala.
Kom Yashala. Kom Yashala. Kom Yashala.
Dismissed.